Hey, good morning, Craig.
Morning, Marty. Good to be with you.
Yeah, so it's actually afternoon here, but
Okay.
I contextualize for you Australians, and I know it's morning for you. So
We're,
it,
we're ahead of you guys in everything,
yeah,
including time.
yes,
So, yeah.
indeed you
Yeah.
are. Well, it's good to see you, Craig and I. For those out there who don't know, Craig is the CEO of Vinegrowers. It's a sister partner ministry based out of Sydney, Australia. Grew out of the trellis and vine thinking from Call Marshall. And Craig has been trained and has taken over for Call and doing a lot of work on the ground there in Sydney and all of Australia, and come over to the US a number of times to help us here think about how to basically recreate or enculturate disciple making ministry in all of what we do in church and in all of life as Christians. So I appreciate you taking some time to talk with me, Craig.
No problem,
Um,
brother.
you're the first person I thought about because I've gotten a number of calls over the last 2 weeks or so. Of course, we're recording this during the worldwide pandemic of the coronavirus. And I'm getting the variation on this one question is, Marty, I'm all in on trellis and vine way of thinking, or we've started the Vine project at our church, but what does vine work look like now? And what they mean by that is, it seems to be that a lot of our trellises, some of them is stripped away completely. Some of them they're the same, but they look quite different.
Mm.
So how are you guys thinking about vine work? That's the question. So I thought, well, I've got to talk to Craig about this. So yeah,
Great.
thanks for coming on. So let me just hear from you. What are you hearing on the ground over there in Australia from your people?
Well, in Australia and North America as well, I've done a lot of
Yeah.
talking with pastors in North America as well. Firstly, I think there's been a huge strain just to get something going, to get over that acute hump, in a sense of what do we do? How do we exist? How do we shepherd and teach our people in this situation? So there's been a lot of scrambling, I think, in that first month to try and work out how are we going to do this and what are we going to do. And so I think that's been the one of the most acute stresses for pastors to manage. My sense is that they're just getting over the hump of that and starting to think, okay, what do we adapt, or how do we change? What does vine work look like now? And so I've been talking with a lot of pastors, trying to think through what does vine work look like on Sunday. And most churches, almost all churches, are doing something online, whether it's live streaming or recording. What does it look like as a result of Sunday? So some of you who've read the Trellis and Vine Project would be familiar with Ministry of the Pew. Is that possible when we are remote? So thinking through those things, how do we speak and pray the word of God with one another, following the services and during the week? What do growth groups look like? Do we just continue with our existing numbers and sizes and just move it all online and try and replicate that as best we can? Pastorally, how do we manage the pastoral load? I've worked with churches from under 100 to many thousand, and so that's a very different challenge, I guess, to pastorally care and to speak the word to your people for their comfort and strengthening. And the home is a really acute one as well. How do we actually equip families for this new normal, and equip parents, particularly fathers, to make disciples in the home? So there's some of the challenges that I've been working with guys on. Yeah.
So there's a lot there. So maybe we won't be able to cover everything, but maybe just pick a couple places there. Let's talk about small groups,
Sure.
growth groups, whatever you call them, and what we're doing. So the church I help pastor, we just basically said all the groups that we're meeting, we're keeping the same group, and we just switched it on over to Zoom online, and just kept on doing the same thing. That's been helpful. What are you guys doing over there?
Well, that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to continue to try and foster people meeting together around the word and prayer, and to encourage one another and care for one another. So I would encourage churches to keep doing that. But I think we need to think about being creative around that. So it's a skill to lead a growth group, small group, whatever you want to call it. Well, I'll call it growth group for this purposes, given there's a publisher who has a good book on the topic. It's a skill to lead a growth group well, 10 or 12 or more people. Okay, and so to lead that online, that's a whole new challenge, complexity, to try and involve people, all those sort of things that you would need to be able to read the room and interpret what's going on. So I've encouraged, I wouldn't mandate, but I've encouraged churches to consider having smaller fellowships. So somewhere around 3 to 6 where possible, for a number of reasons. One, I think at this time people need to be heard. They need to be able to bear their burdens and share what's going on for them. And I think that's hard. The larger the gathering online, the harder that is to do. The larger in a lounge room or a church or wherever as well. But so to be able to speak to 3, 4, 5 people around the word is a good thing. I think that allows people to engage a whole lot more, to learn better in this context. My gut feeling is that the larger groups, whilst people are recording, good participation and people joining in, the novelty may wear off if it was to continue for 3, 6, 9 months.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so we need to be mindful of that. I think one of the great opportunities in this time for equipping and for training is to take people who could have the potential to lead, even if they don't think they do, and to give them an opportunity to lead a very basic kind of study. So keeping the study shorter. If you meet for 90 minutes, 2 hours, try and reduce it to 45 minutes to an hour. It's a long time to be online, and people are online with their business and work and all sorts of things, and catching up with family at the moment. So there can be overload in terms of being on Zoom or Skype or whatever platform you're using. But I think just getting someone who is able and keen to learn to lead something like the Swedish method or some simple Bible study questions, some prayer with 3 to 4, 5 people, you can start to develop, kind of some level 1 leaders we talk about in the Vine Project, and to get people on the rung to be able to lead a small group as we come out of this. So there's a great training and developing opportunity, as well as a great pastoral opportunity and need, I think, to meet in slightly smaller fellowships. And so that's what I've been encouraging churches to consider.
That's a great idea. I think I had a friend who's overseeing small groups at a fairly large church, and we were talking the other day, and he used the term which really stuck with me. He said, yeah, we're realizing we're having to do battlefield promotions. And some of his small group leaders are now, for the first time, saying we need to be in touch with every single person in between our meetings. They meet every other week. And the leader said to my friend, I'm realizing I can't do this all by myself. Yeah. And so that's when he brought up the term battlefield promotion. So as he was asking me, he said, we certainly don't want to truncate. We want godly men of character or people of character, depends on the type of group. But what can we do to help these guys, other than just throwing them on the front line, to use that idea? Is there anything we can do en route as they get to the front line to help prepare them for this kind of work? So you've got a keen person as your sidekick there, and you can say, hey, would you be willing to call 3 of our 12 small group, or take 3 and kind of do as you say and talk with them regularly? Any ideas, any suggestions you have for us?
Sure. Yeah. It's a good question. It's kind of Matthias Media and Vinegrowers bread and butter, I guess. Just clarify the question again. So how can we equip people who may be able to lead a small group or a growth group? Yeah, I think so. We can do centralized training now. We've worked out that we can use Zoom and technology to train people. Yeah. And so the pastor, someone was talking to me about doing a podcast with someone called How to Kill Your Staff. And that was talking about if you had a large church of many hundred or thousand, ensuring that the staff called every person. Now, I understand the pastoral heart behind that. I understand the shepherding concept behind that, the desire behind it. But it's very difficult to go through the same question with 100, 200 people. Yeah. And it's also not necessarily equipping our people who could lead, who could develop in word and prayer ministry to minister to others. We want the saints equipped for works of ministry. And so the thing that you're talking about is an opportunity to get, say, 3, 4, 5 or more people, train them in a small session about how to make a pastoral phone call. Yeah. And so one church that I'm working with has got a sheet. I'm not sure whether they created it themselves, with the emotion that the person may be feeling and some corresponding verses for their strengthening and encouragement. And so they're trying to spend some time training those who will be making phone calls, lay people who may not have done this sort of thing before, just to learn what is happening for this person, what word could encourage or strengthen them at the moment, and praying that with them. So it's a great thing to train lay people in. And so it takes the pressure off the pastor, but also multiplies ministry in the long run. So one of the things that I've been working with pastors on is, as we come out of COVID, and God willing, that won't be 6 or 12 months, but we'll see what happens. As we come out of it, how will various groups of people have moved to the right or taken a step towards Christ?
Yeah,
And so
great question.
includes people who have the capacity to lead, I think, in some way, and to minister to one another. And so we want to do everything we can to equip people. That's been hard, I think, up to this point because of the need to scramble to get something together.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
this extends longer, then I think that's something that pastors really need to start to consider a lot more now.
That's great. And I think I love what you're saying. I mean, all the churches I've been in contact with, they're all, like you said, scrambling just to get content out there online. And I think that's great. Of course, there's a lot of content already out there. And
Mm.
I think one of the things we could say is like maybe we kind of what we've talked about in training on Trellis and Vine and saying, take the total amount of time you spend in kind of your work, your ministry, and just start by taking 10% and saying, we're going to use 10% to train someone during this month, 2 months of the pandemic. So I think that still applies, doesn't it? To say
It does. It
at
does.
least that,
Yeah.
and say, I know I've got to do all this other stuff, but there's got to be sometime I can't just be reactive. I'm going to take 10% and pick three of these guys or three of these people and say, what can we do to move them to the right to help shepherd others? It not only helps them, it helps me help these other people they'll be able to help as well. So there's a lot
That's
of
a, can
things
I
we could, yeah, go ahead.
can I just interrupt? That's a great point, Marty. And I think I'm very mindful that people like you and I, in essentially parachurch ministry, I know in that first few weeks when churches weren't meeting together, pastors just got absolutely bombarded with all the coulds and shoulds for ministry.
Yes.
And I'm not running a church, but I felt overwhelmed. I felt bombarded on their
Yeah.
behalf, trying to sort through all these great ideas, many with good intentions. Um, but I think I would encourage pastors to be thinking about doing a few things well. Obviously, to be ministering in the word and prayer in some way as best they can, and now to really start thinking about using this opportunity, leveraging existing structures that you may have to multiply ministry, to train and equip people. So that helps now, and it's going to have a huge impact down the track.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I
Yeah.
think maybe instead of doing, you could do, Facebook Live thing, and that's helpful. Or you could do that one last time and actually spend that hour with five people who can multiply the ministry deeper and even more broadly, I think. That's just a
Mm.
thought. Happy to,
Yeah, and
as anybody's
that's
watching this, they can push back or, email us questions. We have no problem with that, but I'm pretty convicted that would be a slight, at least a slightly better use of time.
that's right. And it can be hard in the business and all the number of things that pastors have to do. But
Yeah.
where possible, if now they can sit back and just take a minute to pause and reflect and think, can this task multiply ministry in the long run, and how would I go about
Yeah.
doing that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel that I'm a pastor of a church. I don't have the responsibility of full church. There's a number of other pastors on staff, but it's
Mm.
interesting how much my personal pastoral work has increased over these last number of weeks. If people just shoot me a text or call in, can we talk? And I want to be able and willing to do that, but I also have to cut out that time. And I haven't done a great job of it, but talking to you is getting me reinvigorated to double down on that idea, because I firmly believe you on that.
Mm.
One thought I had too is this is where I think helpful resources come into play, to
Mm.
have kind of in your bank of trusted resources. I know a book that I've pushed out a few times. It's called Together Through the Storm by Sydney
Mm.
Sider named Sally Sims. It's just
Mm.
taking the idea of a good theology of suffering and then some practical ways to actually walk together with people through their sufferings in different ways. So we've had some of our leaders read that to kind of brush up on that idea, and that's been helpful.
I couldn't agree more, Marty. I think the resources, there's been some urgent, important needs with resources. And I think about in the home. So families are adapting to a new normal. I mean, everybody is adapting to a new normal, being at home most of the time. And that can be different depending on the state you're in and the country you're in. But by and large, the world's in lockdown. And so there are great opportunities for families, particularly for fathers, in terms of ministering and reading. And this is a shameless plug on behalf of Matthias Media that wasn't planned. I can honestly say that. I've been plugging this book, Bible Reading with Your
Yeah.
Kids, by John Nielsen. I think John is in Chicago. Is that right?
Yes.
And it's just a great little book to equip parents. When I go around the place and talk to to guys in different churches, seems to me that most dads want to be able to read the Bible and pray with their kids, but many just don't know how, or they just don't feel confident, or they're worried they're not doing enough, or they're doing too, whatever it might be. This is just a rationale for why you should and how you can. And it can be read really quickly and easily, and it doesn't take a whole long time. And that can just get you going. And I think that's a great, that's another way of moving people towards Christ, or taking the next step towards maturity in Christ, is equipping men to lead in the home. So I think that's a great thing.
That's good. Hey, can I go back to something that you mentioned earlier? Because it's something I hear almost every church is instituted, if they haven't already been doing this. And I like the idea, but you kind of had a little bit of different take, and just want to tease this out just for a minute. The idea of taking your list, your membership, or your list, and calling every one of them. Certainly something we've done at our church, and I enjoy talking with people otherwise don't normally talk to. But you had said something about burning out your staff, or the idea that sometimes, I know for me, I'm trying to fight against getting into call center mode. It's like, okay, I've got a half hour and I'm going to get through these 3 people. And I go into call center mode. As much as I do care for people, and God's very kind, when I get into it, I just love hearing what God's good work for these people. But I'm wondering if there is a better way. I've been thinking about this, and maybe just do a little math exercise. You mentioned the idea of calling 100 people. Do you think, well, maybe ask you, what do you think about this idea of dividing up the list and calling everyone? You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, well, I think it's, again, it's always contextual, always depends. The shepherd knows his people. And so it's always contextual. It could be dependent on size, it could be dependent on circumstances. There may be people who they need to prioritize calling. I know a lot of guys have done a great job prioritizing those who live alone or lonely. And that makes total sense that they would be trying to contact them directly. But again, it's that thing about stopping and thinking, I can call them directly, and we want our staff to shepherd our people, but can we multiply ministry? Can we equip our lay people to be able to minister in the word and prayer with our people? And so there's a training opportunity in there to maybe take the 10 people, as we talked about, train them in how to do a pastoral phone call. They'll make mistakes. They won't do it as well as what you probably could do it. But it eases
Not me,
your load.
but yes, I take your point. Yeah.
I definitely didn't mean you. They won't do it may not do it as well as the pastor could do it, but they will develop, and we're training and equipping them to care for their people well. So just giving them a simple scaffold to be able to go through a pastoral call. The other thing is that the load on pastors, there's a huge load on pastors at the moment. Their normal routines may have changed, their normal workload in some ways have changed, but there's a huge pastoral burden that many of them are feeling. And so just from a human perspective, getting into call 40 or 50, asking the same questions, as much as you may love and care for that person, it's hard to have the same zeal because we're frail and fragile and fallen, and we just can't do it in the same way, most of us anyway.
No, I'm with, and so it's a training opportunity we don't want to miss, because it helps take some of these leaders or leaders in your pipeline, potential leaders, blokes worth watching.
That's right.
And to give them an opportunity that's in one sense safe and really helpful, and gives them a lot of positive encouragement right away. It's also helpful for the pastor to alleviate some of his load. But I also would say, and I would imagine you'd agree with this, that it actually helps us shepherd deeply. Let's say I took that list of 100 and divided it in 10 guys I know who could call, or 9 others, including myself. And they're each in touch with 10 people. And I'm regularly in touch with these other 9 guys. I'm hearing how they're shepherding these people more deeper than this just one 5-minute phone call that I might be able to do if I'm doing all 100. So it's not only helping the leader and the pastor, but I think in the end, it's helping the people who are receiving the calls.
I think so. I couldn't agree. And it's certainly helping them in the long term. To have more people equipped and just engaged in this type of ministry and ministering to one another. That's what every pastor wants to see. So I think I agree with you on that. I think the other thing that I've seen done well in those pastoral phone calls is having a diaconate or deacons who or a special service team to help with practical needs and acute pastoral care. So in those pastoral phone calls from a growth group leader or someone you may have invested in to ring 10 or 12 others or whatever it might be, a pastoral need comes up that's beyond the scope of that person's capability, a marriage breakdown or whatever it might be, that gets escalated to the pastor or someone who
Yes.
is trained in that practical service and care team, and they then try and help take over and deal with that. So a lot of
Wise.
guys
That's
have done
very
a great
wise.
job with that. Yeah,
Yeah, wise. Well, we only got a few minutes here. I
sure.
want to say something, and then I want to ask you a question. One, it seems like interesting. A lot of things we've talked about. It seems very similar to the training we do for pastors in Trellis and Vine or Vine Project workshops.
Mm,
And we're saying the same idea of ministries, that we need to train people, we need to multiply the ministry, we need to decentralize it away from just being me, the pastor, the only one doing the work. So we're really not saying anything new. We're just
sure.
applying it to a different context. And that's encouraging, because I think those people who've read Trellis and Vine and thought about what we think is the biblical way of ministry have a good start on this. And now it's just a matter of applying these ideas to this context.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Marty. I think that's right. And one of the really encouraging things for me is to have spoken to so many guys who have been moving through the Vine Project and hearing from a number of them that they are feeling so. You can't feel prepared for a pandemic,
Right.
but they've invested so heavily in the last year or two in equipping people for the type of ministry that we've been talking about, that they're kind of just getting into action and they're ready to go and they're seeing great things and they're actually amazed at how these people are just stepping up and
Uh,
initiating pastoral and word and prayer ministry. It's incredibly encouraging for me to see this happening. But I think that's been for me personally the most encouraging thing to
mm,
see these Vine Project teams who many of these churches are flourishing, if you can say that in this
yeah,
context. Yeah,
understood. So
yeah.
last minute, a lot of people are calling asking about evangelism during this time. What are you hearing? You guys, I know there's always struggles, but I think you have some really creative, faithful, creative guys over there thinking about how to do evangelism just during this time. What are you hearing?
One of the things that I've heard in terms of, because people are putting, or pastors are putting, and churches are putting so much energy into Sunday, the online or the streaming service, to have an intentionally evangelistic service in some way, planning that a few weeks ahead, and then just thinking, can we drive some sort of campaign or effort to see everybody or a large number of our people invite one non-believer or one person who's drifted away in the Midwest context, or in the south
Yeah,
of the US, many people would consider themselves Christians. So one person who's drifted away or a non-believer, invite them to your online gathering to hear the
that's
word.
great.
And then from that, let's say we had 200 invites that took place. Could we get 50 or 100 people who actually jump on? It's the easiest invite to church you're ever going to have. All those normal barriers of entering the building and feeling awkward of what to wear and where do I sit and what do I say and when do I stand, they're all removed. And
Huh.
so there's a great opportunity, but then being very explicit in your communication and how you get feedback. And from that, in terms of a pathway from Sunday,
Yeah.
trying to get some type of resource or the word in their hands in some way and trying to find out who it was that invited them. And again, try and use that person somehow in helping that person move forward. So that there's work in that. There's a whole lot of planning and structuring in that, but we're already doing Sunday. Can we be really intentionally evangelistic about at least one of those Sundays in the next month?
That's great. I really like that thinking, and put some thought into how to develop that pathway. That's all essential to communicate well to the outsider, and then develop that. What's their next step? Let's say God pushes on their heart and mind, and what are they doing with it?
Yeah,
And so that's a really important. Well, Craig, we could probably keep going, but I appreciate you sharing what you're thinking about, what you're hearing, and just thanks for taking your time. And we'll keep at this and keep sharing these ideas as we come across them.
thanks, brother. Great to talk.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye now.